The house stood at the end of Willow Lane, its white clapboard exterior peeling like old memories, its wraparound porch sagging under the weight of years. To anyone else, it was just another aging structure in a small town. But to me, Clara Evans, it was everything. It was the place where my grandmother braided my hair on summer evenings, where my father taught me to ride a bike, where every creak of the floorboards held a story. Mrs. Eleanor Grayson, the widow who owned it, had promised it to me. She'd looked me in the eye, her frail hands clasping mine, and sworn that when the time came, the house would be mine. I believed her. I trusted her. And that trust became my undoing. I was 38, a single mother scraping by as a freelance illustrator, pouring every spare dollar into a savings account for that house. It wasn't just a building. It was my anchor, my daughter Lily's future, a tether to the family I'd lost. My parents were gone car accident when I was 20, and my grandmother had passed a decade later. The house was all I had left of them. Eleanor knew this. She'd known my family for decades, shared lemonade with my grandmother on that very porch. When she told me, 2 years ago, that she'd sell it to me for a fair price when she was ready to move, I felt a weight lift. I could see it, Lily running through the sprinkler in the yard, me painting in the attic room with its slanted windows. A home. A real home. But promises are fragile things, aren't they? They bend under greed, crack under convenience. Last month, I drove by the house to check on it, as I often did, and saw a sold sign staked in the front yard like a dagger in my heart. My stomach dropped. I called Eleanor, my hand shaking, thinking it was a mistake. She didn't answer. I drove to her new apartment in town, a sterile little place that smelled of antiseptic and regret. When she opened the door, her eyes wouldn't meet mine. "Clara," she said, her voice thin. "I got a better offer. Cash. Quick close. You understand." I didn't understand. I stood there, my throat tight, my mind replaying every conversation we'd had about the house. "You promised," I said, my voice breaking. She shrugged, her face a mask of indifference. "Business is business," she said, and closed the door. I drove home in a haze, Lily asleep in the back seat, unaware that the dream I'd painted for her was crumbling. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the savings I'd scraped together $30,000. Not enough for a bidding war, but enough to have started something with Eleanor's promised price. I felt betrayed, not just by her, but by the idea that trust could mean so little. But something else stirred in me, to a fire, sharp and unyielding. Eleanor had made a choice, and I would make her feel the weight of it. Not out of spite, but because some wrongs demand justice, and some promises demand to be honored. The next morning, I started digging. Eleanor had always been private, but small towns have long memories. I visited Mrs. Carter, the librarian who knew everyone's secrets. Over tea, she told me Eleanor had sold the house to a couple from the city, the Thompsons, who planned to turn it into a vacation rental. A vacation rental. My grandmother's house, where we'd carved our initials into the oak tree out back, reduced to a soulless Airbnb. Mrs. Carter also mentioned Eleanor's son, Mark, a man with a reputation for cutting corners in his real estate dealings. He probably pushed her to take the higher offer, she said, shaking her head. "Eleanor's not what she used to be." I thanked Mrs. Carter and left, my mind racing. If Mark was involved, there might be a trail, something I could use. I wasn't a lawyer, but I'd learned a thing or two about persistence raising Lily alone. I spent hours at the county clerk's office, poring over property records. The sale had gone through quickly. Too quickly. and the paperwork was sloppy. The Thompsons had paid $250, far above market value for a house that needed work. Something felt off. I requested copies of the deed and sale documents. My artist's eye catching inconsistencies in the signatures. Eleanor's name looked shaky, almost forged. I wasn't sure what it meant yet, but it was a thread, and I'd pull it until it unraveled. That night, I tucked Lily into bed, her dark curls spilling over the pillow. "Mom," she asked, her voice sleepy, "are we still getting the house with the big porch?" I forced a smile, my heart aching. "I'm working on it, sweetheart," I said. After she drifted off, I sat at my laptop, researching real estate law and fraud. I wasn't just fighting for a house anymore. I was fighting for what it represented: trust, legacy, the right to believe in someone's word. Eleanor had broken that, and I'd make sure she faced the consequences, dollar by dollar. By the end of the week, I'd tracked down a lawyer, Sarah Nguyen, who worked pro bono for cases with a hint of injustice. She was sharp, no nonsense, and intrigued by the irregularities in the sale. "If we can prove coercion or fraud," she said, "we might have a case. But it's a long shot. Clara, you need evidence." I nodded, determination settling into my bones. I'd find it. I'd knock on every door, sift through every record, talk to every neighbor who'd ever seen Eleanor or Mark near that house. The fire in me burned brighter each day, fueled by the memory of Eleanor's dismissive shrug. Her cold "business is business." She'd regret it not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted justice. And justice has a way of balancing the scales. The days blurred into a rhythm of research and resolve. I balanced my freelance work, Lily's school schedule, and my growing obsession with uncovering the truth about the house. Every spare moment was spent chasing leads. I'd learned from a neighbor that Mark had been at Eleanor's side during the sale, whispering in her ear as the Thompsons signed the papers. That image gnawed at me: Mark, with his slick smile and predatory instincts, manipulating his own mother. I wondered how much of Eleanor's decision was hers and how much was his. Sarah, my lawyer, suggested I talk to the Thompsons directly. "They might not know the full story," she said. "If they bought the house under false pretenses, they could be allies." I hesitated. Approaching strangers who now own my dream felt like admitting defeat, but I swallowed my pride. I found their address through the property records a sleek condo in the city, an hour's drive away. I left Lily with a sitter and drove out on a crisp Saturday morning, the autumn leaves swirling like my thoughts. The Thompsons, David and Laura, were younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with the polished look of people who'd never worried about money. Their condo smelled of expensive coffee and new furniture. When I explained who I was, Laura's face softened, but David's eyes narrowed. "We bought the house fair and square," he said, crossing his arms. I took a deep breath and told them about Eleanor's promise, my family's history, the shaky signatures. Laura listened, her fingers twisting a napkin, but David cut me off. "Look, we paid good money. This isn't our problem." I left their condo feeling deflated but not defeated. Laura's hesitation stuck with meshed, seemed conflicted, unlike her husband's cold dismissal. I jotted down her email from a business card on their counter and sent her a message that night, appealing to her conscience. "I'm not asking you to give up the house," I wrote, "but if something's wrong with the sale, don't you want to know?" She didn't reply, but I wasn't giving up. Back in town, I dug deeper into Mark's history. A former co-worker of his, found through a mutual acquaintance, described him as a shark in a cheap suit. He'd been involved in shady real estate deals before, pressuring elderly sellers into quick sales for below-market prices, then flipping properties for profit. The pattern fit except this time. He'd pushed Eleanor to take a higher offer, likely pocketing a cut. I wondered if Eleanor even knew the full extent of his involvement. Was she a victim, too, or a willing participant? I started visiting Eleanor's apartment regularly, not to confront her, but to observe. She rarely left, and when she did, Mark was often with her, carrying her groceries or driving her to appointments. His presence was suffocating, and I noticed how she leaned on him, her steps unsteady, her eyes vacant. It stirred a pang of pity in me, but I pushed it aside. Pity wouldn't bring back my house. One evening, while sketching at my kitchen table, I got a call from Sarah. She'd found some thingy discrepancy in the notary records for the sale. The notary, a man named Gerald Hughes, had a history of working with Mark on other deals. This could be big, Sarah said. If we can prove the notary was complicit in fraud, we might void the sale. My heart raced. It was the first real hope I'd had, but it came with a warning. Clara, this could get messy, Sarah said. Mark's not someone who backs down easily. I didn't care. I was already in too deep. The next day, I tracked down Gerald Hughes at a diner on the edge of town. He was older, with a nervous tic and eyes that darted like a cornered animal. I sat across from him, ordered coffee, and got straight to the point. I know about the sale, I said, sliding a copy of the deed across the table. And I know you've worked with Mark before. His face paled, and he stammered something about standard procedure. I leaned in, my voice low but firm. If you're hiding something, it's going to come out. Help me now, and maybe it's easier for you later. Gerald didn't crack, but he didn't deny anything either. He left the diner in a hurry, leaving his coffee untouched. I knew I'd rattled him. That night, I got an email from Laura Thompson. I didn't know about your history with the house. She wrote, David doesn't want to get involved, but I'm willing to talk. It wasn't much, but it was a crack in the wall, and I'd keep prying until it collapsed. As I tucked Lily into bed, she asked again about the house. I kissed her forehead, promising we'd get it back. But in the quiet of my apartment, doubt crept in. Was I chasing a ghost? The house was more than wood, and nail sit was my past, my hope for Lily's future. I couldn't let it go, not when I was this close to answers. Eleanor had made a promise, and I'd make her face the cost of breaking it. One truth at a time. Laura's email was a lifeline, fragile but real. We met at a coffee shop halfway between the city and town, a neutral ground where I hoped she'd open up. She arrived alone, her eyes scanning the room nervously. Over lattes, she admitted she'd been uneasy about the house from the start. David saw it as an investment, she said, stirring her coffee. But the way Mark rushed the sale, it felt wrong. She revealed that Mark had insisted on a cash deal, no inspections, and had pushed Eleanor to sign quickly. I saw her hands shaking. Laura whispered, I thought it was just her age. I told Laura about the notary, Gerald, and the questionable signatures. Her face tightened. If the sale's not legal, what happens to us? She asked. I didn't have an answer, but I promised to keep her in the loop. Her willingness to talk gave me hope that not everyone in this mess was as callous as Mark or as indifferent as Eleanor. Before we parted, she gave me a copy of the sale agreement, which Mark had emailed her. It listed a commission fee paid to him, a detail Eleanor hadn't mentioned. Back home, I shared the document with Sarah. She pounced on it. This is evidence of a conflict of interest, she said. Mark acted as Eleanor's agent while pushing for a sale that benefited him financially. She filed a motion to investigate the sale, citing potential fraud and undue influence. The court agreed to a preliminary hearing, but we needed more. Sarah suggested I talk to Eleanor again. Not to accuse, but to appeal to her conscience. She's human, Sarah said. She might crack if you remind her what the house meant to your family. I wasn't so sure. Eleanor's cold dismissal still stung, but I agreed to try. I went to her apartment the next day, bringing a photo album from my grandmother's time in the house. When Eleanor opened the door, she looked friendlier than before, her eyes clouded with something like guilt. I didn't waste time. This was my grandmother's, I said, opening the album to a picture of her and Eleanor laughing on the porch. You knew what the house meant to me. Why did you break your promise? For the first time, Eleanor's mask slipped. Her lips trembled, and she sank into a chair. Mark said it was for the best, she murmured. He said you couldn't afford it, that the Thompsons would take care of it. I pressed gently, asking about the signatures, the rushed sale. She grew quiet, her hands twisting in her lap. I didn't want to hurt you, Clara, she said finally. But Mark, he handles everything now. That admission was a turning point. Eleanor wasn't the villain I'd imagined. She was a pawn, manipulated by her son's greed. I felt a flicker of sympathy, but it didn't erase the betrayal. I left her apartment with a new goal: expose Mark. If he was the puppet master, I'd cut his strings. I tracked down more of Mark's former associates, piecing together a pattern of coercion and shady deals. 1. A retired realtor named Tom told me Mark had a history of forging signatures to close deals faster. He's clever, Tom said, but sloppy when he's rushed. I shared this with Sarah, who subpoenaed Mark's financial records. They showed deposits from the Thompsons' payment, far more than a standard commission. It was enough to suggest he'd inflated the price for his own gain, possibly without Eleanor's full knowledge. Meanwhile, Lily started asking harder questions. Why are you always so busy, Mom? She said one night, her eyes searching mine. I hated that this fight was stealing time from her, but I explained as best I could. Sometimes, you have to stand up for what's right, I told her, even when it's hard. She nodded, her small hand squeezing mine, and I felt a surge of strength. This wasn't just about might, it was about teaching Lily that promises matter, that justice is worth fighting for. The hearing date loomed, and Sarah prepared me for a battle. Mark would likely have a lawyer, and Eleanor might be too frail to testify. But I had Laura's document, Gerald's nervousness, and a growing stack of evidence pointing to Mark's misconduct. I also had something stronger, the memory of my grandmother's laughter, my father's steady hand, the house that held them both. I'd fight for it, not just to win, but to remind everyone involved Eleanor, Mark, even the Thompsons, that a promise broken has a price, and I was coming to collect. The courtroom was small, its wooden benches worn smooth by years of disputes. I sat beside Sarah, my hands clasped tightly, as the preliminary hearing began. Mark was there, his suit crisp, but his eyes darting like a man who knew he was being watched. Eleanor sat beside him, her face pale, her hands folded in her lap like a child awaiting scolding. The Thompsons were absent, but Laura had sent a letter to the court, expressing doubts about the sale's legitimacy. It wasn't much, but it bolstered our case. Sarah presented the evidence, the questionable signatures, Mark's commission, the rushed sale. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, listened intently. Mark's lawyer argued that Eleanor had every right to sell to whomever she chose, and my emotional attachment didn't constitute a legal claim. I felt my face burn, but Sarah squeezed my arm, whispering, "Stay calm. We've got this." She called Gerald Hughes to the stand, who fidgeted under her questioning. When she pressed him about his history with Mark, he stammered, admitting he'd notarized the documents without fully verifying Eleanor's consent. The courtroom buzzed. The judge ordered a deeper investigation into the sale, freezing the property's title until further notice. Mark's jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Eleanor, though, looked lost, her gaze fixed on the floor. After the hearing, I approached her, ignoring Mark's glare. "You can still make this right," I said softly. She didn't respond, but her eyes met mine for a fleeting moment, and I saw something regret. Maybe. Or shame. Outside, Sarah was optimistic. "We've got momentum," she said. "If we can prove Mark coerced Eleanor, the sale could be voided." But proving coercion was tricky. Eleanor wasn't talking, and Mark was doubling down, spreading word in town that I was a bitter woman trying to steal his mother's money. The whispers stung, but I focused on the next step, finding someone who'd seen Mark pressure Eleanor. I visited old neighbors, friends, anyone who might have witnessed their dynamic. One, a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Ellis, recalled seeing Mark argue with Eleanor on her porch the day before the sale. "He was loud," she said, telling her she'd lose everything if she didn't take the Thompsons' offer. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was another piece of the puzzle. I recorded her statement and passed it to Sarah. Meanwhile, Laura reached out again. She and David were fighting over the house. David wanted to keep it, but Laura was leaning toward cooperating with us. "I don't want to own something that was stolen," she said over the phone. I thanked her, feeling a strange gratitude for her honesty. It reminded me that this wasn't just about winning. It was about restoring what was right. At home, Lily was my anchor. She'd started drawing pictures of the house, her crayons capturing the porch and oak tree with a child's hopeful precision. "When we get it, can I have a swing?" she asked. I hugged her, promising we'd try. But doubt crept in at night. What if we lost? What if the house slipped away forever? I pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on the fight. I wasn't just battling Mark or Eleanor, I was battling the idea that promises could be discarded, that greed could trump loyalty. Sarah uncovered more bank records showing Mark had transferred a chunk of the sale money into an offshore account. It was enough to suggest he'd hidden profits from Eleanor, maybe even the IRS. We filed a new motion, accusing Mark of financial elder abuse. The accusation hit hard. Eleanor's health was declining, and the court ordered a social worker to evaluate her. The social worker's report was damning. Eleanor showed signs of cognitive decline, likely exacerbated by stress and manipulation. She'd trusted Mark to handle her affairs, and he'd exploited that trust. As the case built, I felt a shift. This wasn't just about the house Anna Maria, it was about exposing a system that let people like Mark prey on the vulnerable. I started a blog, sharing my story anonymously, hoping to warn others. It gained traction, and soon, strangers were emailing me their own stories of broken promises and shady deals. It gave me strength, knowing I wasn't alone. The final hearing was set for a month away. Sarah warned me it would be brutal. Mark's lawyer would fight dirty, and Eleanor's testimony could sway things either way. But I was ready. I'd spent months gathering evidence, building allies, and holding onto the memory of that house. Eleanor had broken her promise, but I'd make sure she and Mark faced the consequences, not just for me, but for everyone they'd wronged. The month before the final hearing was a whirlwind. I juggled work, Lily's school, and endless meetings with Sarah. The blog had taken on a life of its own, with local papers picking up the story. "Small-town betrayal, a fight for a family home," read one headline. It didn't name Mark or Eleanor, but the town knew. Whispers followed me at the grocery store, some supportive, others accusing me of dragging an old woman through the mud. I ignored them. This wasn't about gossip, it was about truth. Sarah's team uncovered more damning evidence. Emails between Mark and Gerald, discussing how to streamline the sale. One email mentioned keeping Eleanor in the dark about the commission. It was the smoking gun we needed. Sarah also found a witness, a former assistant of Mark's who'd quit after he asked her to alter documents. She was willing to testify, her voice trembling but resolute. I couldn't live with it, she told us. He used his mother like a pawn. I tried one last time to reach Eleanor. I wrote her a letter, not accusing but pleading, enclosing a photo of her and my grandmother from decades ago. You knew what the house meant. I wrote. You can still do the right thing. I dropped it in her mailbox, unsure if she'd read it. Part of me wanted to believe she'd been manipulated, that the Eleanor who'd shared lemonade with my grandmother wasn't gone. But I couldn't afford to hope too much. Laura became an unexpected ally. She convinced David to meet with us. And though he was still defensive, he agreed to testify that Mark had pressured them into a quick sale. He said it was now or never. David admitted. I didn't think to question it. Their testimony could tip the scales, showing the sale wasn't just unethical but potentially illegal. As the hearing approached, I felt the weight of what was at stake. Lily sensed it, too. One night, she crawled into my lap, holding one of her drawings. Is the house worth all this, Mom? She asked. I hesitated. Was it? The house was a symbol, but the fight had become bigger about standing up to greed, protecting the vulnerable. I hugged her tightly. It's worth it because we're fighting for what's right, I said. She nodded, and I realized she was learning something I hadn't planned, that justice takes courage. The courtroom was packed on the day of the hearing. Mark's lawyer painted me as a vengeful opportunist, but Sarah dismantled his arguments with precision. She presented the emails, the assistant's testimony, the social worker's report. When Eleanor took the stand, the room fell silent. She looked small, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, she said, her eyes flickering to me. Mark said it was best for me. When Sarah asked if she'd signed the deed willingly, Eleanor hesitated, then whispered, I don't remember. It was enough. The judge ruled the sale invalid, citing evidence of coercion and fraud. The house's title reverted to Eleanor, pending a new, transparent sale. Mark faced charges for financial elder abuse, and Gerald's notary license was under review. As we left the courtroom, Sarah hugged me. You did it, Clara, she said. But it didn't feel like victory, not yet. I visited Eleanor the next day. She was alone, Mark's influence temporarily gone. She invited me in, her hands shaking as she offered tea. I'm sorry, she said, tears in her eyes. I didn't know what I was doing. I believed her, but the hurt lingered. I told her I'd still buy the house, at the price she'd promised, if she was willing. She nodded, whispering, It's what your grandmother would have wanted. Driving home, I felt lighter but not whole. The house was within reach, but the fight had changed me. I'd learned how far people could fall, how greed could twist even the kindest hearts. But I'd also learned my own strength, and Lily's belief in me fueled that fire. The house wasn't just a dream, Anna Maria, it was a testament to what I'd fought for, what I'd won back, piece by piece. The paperwork was finalized a month later. Eleanor, free from Mark's shadow, sold me the house at the price she'd promised $150,000. A fair deal for its condition. I used my savings and a small loan, scraping together every penny. The day I signed the deed, Lily stood beside me, clutching her sketchbook, her eyes bright with excitement. We're home, Mom, she said. and I felt tears prick my eyes. The house was ours, but it came with scars of betrayal, of a fight I hadn't wanted but couldn't avoid. Moving in was bittersweet. The porch creaked under my steps. The oak trees still bore our initials, but the memories felt heavier now, layered with the battle to reclaim them. I spent weekends painting walls, fixing leaks, making the house ours. Lily picked out a swing for the yard, and we hung it together, her laughter echoing like my grandmother's once had. The house was alive again, not just a structure, but a home, filled with our hopes. Eleanor visited once, unannounced. She stood on the porch, her hands clasped, looking older than ever. "I'm glad it's yours," she said softly. I invited her in, and we sat in the kitchen, sunlight streaming through the windows. She told me about Mark, how he'd controlled her decisions, how she'd been too tired to fight him. "I broke my promise," she said, "and I'll carry that." I didn't forgive her, not fully, but I understood. She'd been a victim, too, in her own way. Before she left, she handed me an old recipe card, me grandmother's lemonade recipe, written in her looping script. "Keep this," Eleanor said. I nodded, a lump in my throat. The blog I'd started became a platform for others. People reached out, sharing stories of lost homes, broken trusts. I connected them with Sarah, who took on new cases. It wasn't just about my victory, it was about shining a light on those who exploited trust. Like Mark. He faced jail time, his reputation in ruins. The Thompsons, meanwhile, walked away, their dream of a vacation rental abandoned. Laura sent me a card, wishing us well in the house. I kept it, a reminder that even in conflict, humanity could shine through. As months passed, the house became more than a symbol. It was where Lily did her homework, where I painted late into the night, where we rebuilt our lives. But the lesson lingered. Promises are sacred, but they're only as strong as the people who make them. Eleanor's betrayal had cost her peace. Mark's greed had cost him freedom, and my fight had cost me innocence. Yet it gave me something greater: resilience, a home, and a story to tell Lily when she's older. One evening, as the sun set, I sat on the porch with a glass of lemonade made from my grandmother's recipe. Lily swung on her swing, singing softly. The house felt warm, alive, its creaks no longer just memories but promises kept. I'd made Eleanor regret her choice, not through vengeance but through truth, through standing up when it would have been easier to walk away. Every dollar she'd gained from that sale had come at a cost: her conscience, her son's downfall, her place in this town. And I'd made sure of it, not for revenge, but for justice, for the house that held my heart, and for the daughter who'd inherit its legacy.